Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming to our session today. Uh, we wanted to share part of our own journey here, as we have been really focusing on equity in the schools, and even if we're focusing on equity in the schools in a way that has really shifted from the way that we were thinking about it several years ago. We wanted to sort of take you on some of our journey and some of the things we've learned in terms of sort of the way conditions are now, and really the imperative of really engaging with equity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so that we can get to where we want to go. And let's see, I'm going to make sure I do the button clicking. And one of my styles for working in this virtual world is that I constantly talk to myself as I'm doing things. So I have found that to be reasonably helpful as we move through this. So let me hit that button there. And here we go. So welcome to Confronting Equity and Race as Educational Leaders. I am going to just shift over here, and I'm going to give my co-host Kim a chance to introduce herself first and introduce a little bit about Learning Forward New Jersey. Hit it, Kim.
Thanks. Let me know if you hear some background noise. My husband started some construction in our bathroom right now. So if it's bothering you, let me know, and I'll run upstairs and ask him to stop. But yes, my name is Kim Tucker. I just retired after 32 years in public education, and I'm now working as an adjunct professor at Stockton and doing some consulting. And Learning Forward used to be known as the National Staff Development Council, but we're not about staff development anymore. So the name was changed to Learning Forward, and our mission is quality job embedded professional learning. So Bob, did you introduce yourself yet?
I did not. So my name is Bob Price. I am presently the president of Learning Forward New Jersey. Kim is our former president. And I am a retired director of curriculum and instruction from the Northern Valley Schools in Upper Bergen County, and a couple of my former colleagues are on the call here today, so nice to see them. I'm also an adjunct professor at Montclair State University, where I am teaching in the education program. And I could say from both Kim and I are consultants with New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, and in those areas, we have really been concentrating on social emotional learning, assessment, and equity. So that's kind of the perspective that we're coming from as we do this today. Learning Forward in New Jersey, we have probably about 300 members that we have conferences. In the past, we'd have live conferences. We're working on other things for the future, but we have kept our hand in things, doing the best we can with coming with some strategies of this online learning and trying to get the word of professional learning out there. So moving along here, knowing who we are, I should also say that the members of our executive board really are principals and superintendents and teachers, curriculum people, consultants, higher ed, and we were asked as issues of as equity was really becoming more and more of on the radar of everyone in June. We were asked to support schools, and we were being asked all kinds of questions about how to engage faculty in issues that really are important in our curriculum. And one of the pieces that we realized very quickly is that we really need some learning. We really need to improve our learning and our understanding, that we are not necessarily the go-to people. And that if we're going to really make a difference in the school, we really had to take a step back and attend to our own learning and really look for the resources that we needed. Did you want to add to that, Kim?
Just that, again, this journey kind of started right after George Floyd and that incident, and we were getting some training on equity. And as board members of Learning Forward, we realized that we had never had a conversation really about race. And, we have some diversity on our board, and we'd never talked about it. In fact, one board member shared one board member who's African American shared that she always, it always bothered her that when we would do sessions, when we would have conferences or workshops, that it was like the cafeteria again, she said, that all the African American people would sit together and all the white people would sit together. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I think I'm guilty of that, and why is that? And why have I never talked about this before? So we said, you know what, as a board, we need to do more learning around this topic. And that's what brings us here today.
And I think we were lucky in the sense that we knew everyone. And once this issue really hit the table with all of us, we really felt that take a step back, and we really needed to refocus. We had actually both been asked to develop a workshop for administrators around the state on equity back in January. And, it was kind of on the schedule, and we were putting together a team when we realized that we really need to refocus our thinking about equity. This is not just a side workshop that fits in with everything else that we're doing. So that was our starting point for our journey. So one of the things that we always really spend time on is norms. And we really felt this time we needed to spend some extra time on it. So our recommendation to everyone is that if you're working with a group where you can spend time with them, perhaps at your school district, to have that opportunity to develop norms yourself, there's a lot more ownership in doing that. But when we are meeting sometimes with 50 people we've never met before to talk about this, we got together and came up with some norms to kind of push people on the importance of what we're talking about. So just take a look there at our 5 norms. Mm-hmm. So the one we really wanted to emphasize, because we realized, even talking to people that we've known for years, that to put it out there and say, pursue messy conversations that allow us to be curious about each other's ideas is an important thing. That just putting it out there on the table to say that there very, very well needs to be uncomfortable conversations that take place. But if we can still be learners and embrace people with positive intent, we can have these conversations, which perhaps were not the kind of conversations that had taken place in our schools prior to this. So we have something we'd actually like to share with you. Even getting together with that group and saying we needed more, then we started to do some outreach. And George Guy, who actually is talking in one of the sessions that is taking place right now with us, is a friend of ours who has been very, very helpful. He's down in Cherry Hills School District. And I've known him now for years and gone to his workshops and had some of these conversations with someone who has had a lot of these conversations. And he's been really, really helpful. So one of the things he showed us very early that we want to share with you is a really short video called The Look. And what we want to ask you to do is, while we're watching this video, what do you notice and what do you feel? So here, let's give it a go. Let's give it a look.
All rise.
So we would like to just take a moment and we would just like to take a moment and, this virtual world, which is so challenging at times, give you a chance to perhaps share with us what you thought or what you were thinking
Or feeling.
or feeling.
I'll go. I feel like literally in the beginning of the video, doors were being shut on him, and the little child as well in the pool, and then he opened up his own doors to his own path and ignored the way he was being treated unkindly.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. How about somebody else?
I noticed others' body language and also facial expressions immediately.
I was embarrassed for the people that looked right at him they were in the elevator. I thought, how could they do that? It was very unkind, just thoughtless.
Hi, everybody. I saw this as a reality of my life and the prevailing narrative around Black lives in this nation. So it was very commonplace, and it is certainly unfortunate, but this is a norm.
And I also thought about my own son and appearances, because you notice that he had his hoodie on. He's a professional, but when people look at outward things besides, they made assumptions about who he was as a Black man with the hood, closing doors. And then he sat up on the judge's bench, and it's the same man. He's accustomed to feeling that and experiencing that. And I thought about my son, who's an attorney, and I'll say to him, oh, today, when he's not at work, he looks like the first guy. But when he's going to work, he has on his suit. And I imagine he gets the same reaction every time, because that's our society.
It's that identity that people put on other people,
right,
based on what they bring to that,
or what they perceive it as being.
Right.
Hi, hello everyone. I am that felt like norm to me as well. Coming from Newark, New Jersey, being raised in an urban area, I remember being in school and already getting the messages that you have to be aware of how you dress. You have to be aware of how you present yourself, because of some of these stereotypes that are out there.
Exactly.
I remember the teachers telling my counterpart males, African-American men, how they should carry themselves on a daily basis because of stereotypes just like this. Mindful also that I did go to an urban school, and it was a Catholic school. So of course you had that other component to it, but the message was the same. You had to be careful about how you presented yourself and how you dressed, because you had to, if everyone else in the world is dressing on a 5, you had to dress on an 8 just to show up.
I want to share something too, though, and I think that this is the other portion of that, is that none of that really matters, right? Because he will still get those looks in his suit. He will still get those looks in his, in whatever fine attire he is in, because you are not supposed to be in that space at that time, no matter what that space is, no matter what that time is.
And I would totally agree with that.
And that's why, I get so frustrated with this kind of respectability politics and this kind of like, oh, we have to, and we have, because it does not matter. What we have to do, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, is push that narrative of how do we dispel your confusion around who others are versus how do we kind of force ourselves into something that you will never appreciate and understand. And so how do we move forward in a different light, I think is really super important, and how we change that conversation to put it on someone else and not on us, because it's not theirs. Yeah, that's all.
You know, this is a huge learning piece for me. And the disappointing part for me is on the other side, not being shocked by the look that he's getting from people. You know,
Exactly.
noticing that it happens in the world and seeing it from my perspective. The other part that was a huge learning piece for me, and it goes right to what you were just saying, was when he does walk into that kind of fancy clothing store. And it was, George had asked me about this. He said, did you notice something that he did when he came into the store? And I said, well, he gave a nod to the person when he came in. He said, yes, he did. Because George said this to me. He goes, when I walk into a store like that, I do nod to someone who I feel that might be feeling that he has to watch me, to say, I know that you know that I'm here. And that's something that I would never ever think to do. And to be confronted with such a different culture for someone that I'm walking next to along the street or working in the same profession with as equal professionals. So 140 seconds of, you know, it's Procter & Gamble, nice production quality, but really brings so much to a conversation that we could actually spend the whole time, I think, just talking about that
We
one.
could. And before we move on, though, Bob, I will add that, you know, some people that watched us with us, we were in a large group, and some white people like me said, well, that doesn't happen all the time, though. I mean, like in that video, that was sort of an exaggeration, right? And right, I see you all shaking your head. No, George had to clarify, and George said, you know, he's got to wear his school ID at all times when he's at school. And even so, because he has a white assistant principal, people will go to the assistant principal as if that's the principal first, and that this is a common thing. And it just struck me how hard it was for people who, you know, are not people of color and who have not experienced this to understand and know that this is the reality every single day for so many people. That was shocking for me.
That really was so helpful in our journey of, you know, if we're in these positions of power, sometimes in schools, we need to spend some time really examining issues that are outside our culture.
Would the reaction be different if it wasn't an African American man?
Versus.
Potentially, yeah, you know.
And I also think we have to look at addressing the special needs population as well. Okay, it's a whole gamut of issues, but it's accepting people.
Yes.
Of all different backgrounds, all different, unfortunately, abilities, and our society has done a poor job. Very poor job.
Well, one other thing that I thought was interesting is that even in the very beginning, when the little girl was in the car with the mother, like the little girl was, you know, real quick to wave and say hello and be so friendly and open. And it was the mother that, you know, rolled up the window. So it's like, at what point do, you know, we change our, you know, our thinking and we start to feel this way and not include people?
I think it's one way is it's how we're socialized around race, who actually talks about race and who doesn't. I grew up in a home where race was always talked about. So a George Floyd case did not have to happen. That was just a part of my cultural experience as a Black young girl. My father inculcated what it means to be Black, and we talked about social issues. So we didn't wait for a news event to talk about it. So it's how one is socialized around race, who is actually in their world and how they're operating within that world. So it's okay to say, oh, I have people of color in my world, but in what capacity? Are they serving you? What capacity? So I think that's really important, like how we are socialized around race.
So that, again, I'm going to say that kind of lack of socialization on my part led us to reach out to some other people. And, you know, I do want to say that, yes, the idea of equity needs to expand as it should. We want equitable classrooms for everyone there.
Everyone.
But even when I think of things like special ed, there's a special ed department in my school, and there's social workers in my school, and there's really there were always powerful advocates among the parents, at least in my district, and so much more needs to be done. But there really isn't a place there wasn't a place in my schools to talk about the issues of race. So I think that that's where we felt our deficit, and that's why we reached out to other people. And two people we really enjoyed and learned a lot from was Kalisa Wing and Danielle Massey. We had met them actually in an equity workshop that we had sponsored about 2 years ago. And they had the skills to get us to a safe place to talk about issues that we've never talked about before as educational professionals. And that was really helpful. Where they brought us was this idea of really looking at anti-racism. So Kim, did you want to jump in here on this?
Sure. So we had never really even heard that term anti-racism, some of us, you know, it's relatively new, and we decided that we wanted to learn more about it. And the definition we're using is the policy or practice of opposing racism and promoting racial tolerance. So Danielle and Kalisa helped us investigate some myths that will impede that work, and how to shift from what she called niceness to anti-racism, something that I feel, you know, I can honestly say I may have been guilty of as well. You know, after George Floyd, tensions were high, and if I saw a person of color in my neighborhood, I was extra nice, and that's not really anti-racism. You know, that was my way of dealing with it. But she helped us learn that, and how we can help in the goal of advancing the work of anti-racism.
So with that said, again, I'm going to say our advantage was that we had worked with Kalisa and Danielle before. We again were a group of people who had had conversations for years on many different subjects, and we were able to jump into this conversation. But that's not necessarily the case. If I was perhaps back at one of my schools doing this, I would not have had that same level of comfort. And it's really hard to do this. So we thought we would, you know, just do a couple of minutes on putting out that question of where you are with where we want to be. Have you had these conversations? And I just thought we'd throw it out again to our small group here if somebody wanted to share. Is it possible to, or have you found some strategies that have enabled you to have conversations which really have not taken place before in many of our schools?
Hi, I don't have my video up right now, but my name is Danielle West Augustin, and our school has begun to do some of these conversations. We started off with literally reading the book Anti-Racism, and then we built a diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops to begin. I don't want to call them workshops because this has to be work that's embedded into what you do. So we had rewritten our curriculum probably about 2 years ago now, and it was rewritten with a very culturally relevant lens, but the majority of our teaching staff is Caucasian. So it was a very hard lift with teachers being comfortable teaching the material. So when we really realized that, our next step was, okay, how do we deal with this, and how do we begin to talk about implicit bias that people hold? And we did it with really starting to read the book and then just starting the conversation. And since that time, we've worked with some consultants that have been very helpful in continuing that conversation, but it has to be ongoing.
Right.
Well, that's great to hear. What school district are you with, so we can bug you to find out some of your successes?
I lead Queen City Academy Charter School, which makes it a little bit easier because we're a very lean organization. We're not a huge school. We're K-8, soon to be K-12.
Okay, that's great. That is really good. Thank you. Somebody else want to share a little bit on the setting? Yes, Sharon, I think I see a hand up.
If no one's going to share, I want to jump in a little bit and talk about the idea of, you know, the discussion of race in schools. I think that there are, I call them backdoor conversations about race. And a lot of times we see these reflected in our school data, right? When we look at end of the year achievement scores, or we're looking at student disposition data in terms of referrals and suspensions and expulsions, and those kinds of conversations will lead to looking at our demographics. And when we're seeing disproportionately higher numbers of children of color in certain situations in schools, to me, those are kind of backdoor conversations that we have about race, where children of color are disproportionately represented in the areas in which we don't want them, in achievement gap issues and things like this. However, moving the conversations from why these things are happening to the systems of racism that occur, that's a more layered conversation and more explicit and direct, and kind of what brings us in these conversations that we're having today. I work in a New Brunswick school district right here, and urban versus suburban district generates certain kinds of statistics about our students and why certain things happen. For our district, we have started this conversation at kind of a grassroots level in the form of a PLC for people who were motivated by the Charlottesville incident that had happened. I think that's probably going back 4 years ago, and trying to figure out how to bring these racial conversations in order to benefit our students, because their lives are impacted as well. Mm-hmm. And 3 years later, because of this grassroots efforts from teachers and certain admins and supervisors, we formed an equity alliance group that is really beginning to tackle this work on how to have these conversations embedded in the day-to-day work for teachers and having to face these conversations. One book, and I won't talk more, that we actually used, we had a book club this summer, and we used Dr. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And his identity, he speaks about, the identity that all people have to have. Like, there is no in between. You're either a racist or you're anti-racist. Either you're working to perpetuate the systems of racism and racist ideology, or you're working against it. So there's no neutral ground. If there's one book that I could recommend, I would definitely recommend that book by Dr. Kendi.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, someone else wanted to speak.
Hi, I'm Ojetta Towns. I work at Ridgewood Public Schools in Bergen County. I'm the HR manager, but as a whole, our district has been talking about race and these hard conversations for about the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. Our superintendent and I had gone to a racism workshop. And when he came back, we started with our administrators. So each year we give them 1 or 2 books. We started a book club. We also every summer give the whole administrative team a book that we can all talk about during our retreat. And also now this year, it's called the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, but it's formed by parents. Mm-hmm. So we have teachers doing things, we have parents who want to be engaged because they're concerned about the type of literature and curriculum that we are providing to the kids. In Ridgewood, the population is only about 1% African American. There are more Hispanics, maybe about 10%, but predominantly a white, affluent, suburban community. But they are sensitive to race and equity. A lot more Asians than I think Latin Americans. So between all the parents, they are asking for more diversity in the curriculum. They want more diversity in our teaching staff. But our superintendent is really committed to this work. So we have every year for the last 2 or 3 years been reading and talking and trying to form certain committees to make people comfortable, because it's really an uncomfortable conversation. Mm-hmm. We read this year, I think it was called White Privilege. Mm-hmm. We've read students who were white, all the Black students sitting in the cafeteria together. I'm not saying the correct title, right, but it's an old book that has been rewritten. So we are working on it, but it is slow. And we often say that it is that is work that will have to always continue. It's never going to be solved. So we're trying to get our administrators comfortable and our teachers comfortable. And we have had several speakers come in and give us training. Mr. Guy came from out west. Oh, from out west. And he trained the administrators, and then we gave it to the parents that night. and we gave it to the students at the high school in the day. So we're trying, but it's a slow process.
And I think that's important that what you're saying is it's an across the board issue. It's something
Right.
that has to span all of the schools, and it's work that's never done. I think
Right.
those are two great takeaways. That actually, your comments really transition us well to another activity that we did that really seemed to open up the conversations thoughtfully, so that people had several things to talk about. We stole this from Daniela and Kalisa, but they put up these 4 quotes, and just asking the group here, just which one, in reading the 4, which one jumps out at you first? Like, which one really sticks to you? And I'll tell you, while you're reading, I did this with a group of college students yesterday, and I found this to be, there was more dialogue on this than just about anything I have done this semester. They really wanted to talk about, this was a really excellent jumping off point. So take a look at the 4.
See, I can't see the 4th one. Let's see. Okay.
And Kim, how are we doing on time?
3:45, 15 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, we could solve all the problems of the world in 45 minutes.
Absolutely.
So real quick, just in the chat, put the author, the one that jumped out at you. Was it Vivian, Lewis, Lowry, Curry? Just one that jumped out at you. Put it in the chat so that others can see. And you know what, I'm seeing the same thing last night. It's quite, it's a variety, but I'm seeing a lot of Lewis, and I'm seeing a lot of
Lowry,
Lewis, and Vivian.
Yeah.
Hi, I like that. So Kim, did you you like these 4 too here?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes an activity like this that you could take back to your staff is a good sort of entry point for a discussion, as some have said in the chat today. Sometimes the culture isn't feeling safe to have these conversations, but this is a way to get the conversation started that may be a little bit less threatening, and then people can choose the one that speaks to them. For some reason, I guess I'm the minority here in picking Constant Curry's quote, because I think the one thing I always think about is passion, and how my passion can be my biggest downfall, but also it can be the best thing about me. And I think that all the events that happened this summer, I did start taking it personally, thinking about all my friends and colleagues, and I did start taking it personally. And I think that's why Bob and I and our organization said, we're not going to sit quietly about this anymore. We're going to do the learning, and we're going to see what we can do in the field for these efforts.
So with that said, I'm going to tell you that if you do take this back with you, that it really will generate, and it's a safer place to generate a conversation, and then you can take it from there. That brought us to some big learning on our part, and it was this idea of this myths of anti-racism. And I just want to sort of throw this one out here, because this is what we learned, that there are actions that people take that are positive. They're certainly good, and they're certainly positive. There's things we can perform, and we can practice empathy, and we can participate in things like a march or a fundraiser. And we will often defend the work that we do, and sometimes we'll fall into the generalization of the whole thing is too hard. These are all great starting points, but they're not actions that really work towards anti-racism. They're not part of that really like doing part of it. So I know we're in this really short period of time. This is something we could spend the whole day talking about. Performance is maybe being nice with a smile and being positive, but it's not enough to really work towards the changes that we want that were reflected in the last slide. So this would be the way of us thinking about racism, anti-racism, and the work that's involved. One thing that we did take away that we thought is a useful tool is that as individuals and as this conversation continues, to hold on to these 4 imperatives of addressing the issues of race and equity, that we need to listen to people's stories. We need to listen to people's perspectives. And it's not easy to listen. Listening isn't hearing and comparing to something in your life, or hearing and trying to make a connection to something maybe that's more personal. It's really listening to that person's story and then validating it. Like, you hear it as their reality, or you hear it as their experience. And then what can I learn from that? And then finally, how do I act upon it? How can I critically think about this and act forward on it? We use these 4 imperatives for a series of videos of people telling personal stories, so that we practice this idea of really listening and validating. If we listen and adjust, then we never really move forward in our learning. And one thing Kim has really added to this, because we know that there'll be times where we're going to have pushback, is to build protocols that are important for having these conversations. And I know, Kim, you wanted to say something about Singleton's work.
Well, I see that many of you have already put this in the chat, so thank you for that. But we like sharing some protocols that people can use back in their districts. And this Courageous Conversations About Race from Glenn Singleton, again, you can see it here: stay engaged, even when it makes you uncomfortable. And I think we have to prepare our staff for that. In some cultures, school cultures, it's not, we don't ever like to feel uncomfortable, but we may feel uncomfortable when we're having these conversations. Speak your truth, a willingness to share what's real for you, even if it's not real for everyone else. Experience discomfort, getting good at being uncomfortable. And then I think this one's the most important, for me at least: accept and expect non-closure. Because at the end of our first conversation, courageous conversation about race, we most likely will not come to closure at that conversation. This is ongoing work. This doesn't get solved in one little task force, that has a few meetings and maybe puts out a new policy. That's not how this work gets done. So we have to accept that our first conversation is not going to be our last. It will probably be messy. It will probably be uncomfortable. Certainly I am uncomfortable speaking about this even now, because I'm not a person of color, so I can't speak from that perspective. But we have to be courageous about this in order to try to advance this work.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback a little bit on that. When we did have Kalisa come and speak, she did an amazing workshop that, for the first time in my life, and I'm old, for the first time in my life, I was able to have a conversation with people about subjects that I didn't even know I was allowed to talk about. The one activity that she did with a room of about 50 people was simply to put up the thing that we have all looked at 100 times in filling out a application, the section on race: Caucasian, white, African American, Black, Pacific Islander, Native American, right down the line. And then she simply asked us to put down what we put normally. And then she went around the room and found people for different categories, and then had them stand up and tell their stories. And it was just so eye-opening to me, because if I wanted to say an example of privilege is privilege for me, I'm white male. I give that absolutely zero thought. There is absolutely no variability or choice in that. And I learned that is not the case for a vast majority of people who sit down to look at those pieces. And we had a conversation about that I found very helpful. Afterwards, I did ask Kalisa, I said, I would like to do more on this, but I don't feel like I'm qualified. How do I talk to my students at Montclair who are in a diverse class about race when I am, the veteran educator white male? And she was great. She gave me a hard time. She said, no, not only, it's not so much about being qualified. It's about that you need to be part of the conversation, and you need to be making sure that conversation takes place. And it was so easy to avoid that conversation in just about any school sitting that I've ever worked in. So that challenge became a part of this idea of moving forward. So we're kind of throwing it back at you in this very short session that we have. I almost feel like we should have called this like the troublemaker session. Just we'll throw a whole bunch of things up there that people really want to talk about, and then we'll have to end it and leave people on to begin their own journey. But we would like to leave you with that idea of, so what do I need? Who can I find? How do I make things move forward? And you already made great suggestions. Almost every book that you've mentioned, I haven't necessarily read, but I know where to find it on a bookshelf, and it's in my reading list, along with about 50 articles, from the smallest article about the young woman who got Merriam-Webster to change the definition of racism in the dictionary, to personal stories that people have written about being the children of a Black and a white parent. Those are becoming part of helping me to understand and have conversations with others. And Kim actually total credit for finding this, which I think is the perfect cartoon. No matter how much work we've done, and I've heard some people have already done some great work. There's a lot for doing something about it it's going to be hard work. It's going to be work that's uphill, but it's going to be worth it. And one of the things we've said in another workshop, I believe it's an imperative. So Kim, you want to take us out here?
Sure.
Or also we have a couple of minutes. We have a couple of minutes for people to actually maybe comment on that, where we would be going on your journey piece.
Yeah. If anybody would like to, we'd love to hear about that. You can see here that this is some of our contact information. You can follow at Learning Forward, NJ, Learn Forward NJ on Twitter. And you see both of our Twitter handles. Our website is nj.learningforward.org. I put a link to a copy of our presentation in the chat. I'll do that again right now, but we do have a few moments remaining. I realize now in that slide a few slides ago that said, where will you begin your journey? After talking about all of your stories, that many of you have been on this journey a long time. You're not just beginning the journey. So that was sort of, again, my bias coming out. But I'd love to hear from some of you either what steps you've taken on this road or what steps you plan to take next in the near future. If you want to share in the chat, or if you would like to share out loud, we're lucky to have 3 more minutes. And thank you, Tricia, for your suggestion in the chat of getting students started talking and then listening.
Now I'll be presenting at the Teachers Convention in November. I was a teacher in Louisiana in 1969 when the schools were mandated to integrate. And I've written a book about that, and I'm now talking about it. It's personal stories. And I'm just so pleased to see these conversations, because part of the reason that I wrote the book was it was so distressing to see that 50 years, last year was the 50th anniversary of what they call the crossover in Louisiana. And there's just so much more work to do. And in my professional career as an educator, I've been involved in many of these trainings. 10 years ago, I'm a special educator. Overrepresentation of minorities was a very important conversation. It's still a problem. There's just so much work to do, and I'm so pleased to see this program. And I just congratulate you for the conversations.
Thank you. And I think you make one evolving thing is that I'm hoping that this is about learning and continuous learning, rather than anyone thinking that there's a training program or that there's a book or that there's a video or something that to pay. This is going to be hard work across the board for everyone, but you know, thanks for sharing that. As far as we come, we haven't come that far. So I noticed I'm looking at the chat, and one quick story again about my own learning was on, I see white fragility being mentioned several times in the chat. There was an article in the Atlantic that came out, and it was by an African-American man, professional, successful professional, that was very much in opposition to white fragility. And that had come across our desk. And I remember reaching out to a friend and saying, you know, this is the Atlantic. We're going to see this as we move forward on workshops. And this friend that I had reached out to is African-American. And in his voice, there was a tiny bit of almost like laughing as he schooled me in the idea of, well, yes, Bob, the Black culture is not a monolithic culture that everyone agrees with everything all the time along the way, and that there will be people, just like there is in every other group, who will have different views. And, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, well, of course, why didn't I think that way? Why didn't I think that way? Why did I think that this was some harder hit to the work than it was? And that, again, helps me move a little further along in my understanding of as much as where other people are, but really where I am in this conversation that needs to change.
Well, I want to say thank you. I know you're probably looking to get to your next session. So thank you so much for all your contributions and being courageous today to have this conversation with us. Thank you.
Yes,
And I'm going to put a link into the chat, and that is for your agenda. And it also will have where you can fill out your form, and you can fill out your evaluation form, and you'll also be able to look and get your hours as well for your PD. And I wanted to say thank you so much. I'm sorry, Bob, I didn't mean to step on you. I would just want to put that out there before they all jumped off and went to the next session. So Bob, take us out.
No, thank you all very much. This is the first time that we've done something like this too. So thank you so much. It's risky business, and it's going to be worth the effort.